My name is Jacintha Frank, and I'm 33 years old. If I've learned anything from a decade in investment strategy, it's that you can spot the breaking point of anything, an asset, a system, a relationship, long before it collapses. There's always a signal, a flicker on the line, a tracer in the dark. Mine came on a rainy Wednesday night. Liam and I were sitting in the living room of the house I bought before we ever met. The lamps threw a warm light over everything. His laptop, my cup of tea, the faint hum of a playlist he'd chosen to help us unwind. I remember thinking how perfect it all looked from the outside, and how wrong it felt inside. He was scrolling through venue photos on his iPad, muttering about floral arrangements and guest lists. I was talking about my sister Diane. Diane had just lost her job. She's 2 years younger than me, a project manager with 2 little boys and a mortgage she and her husband were barely keeping up with. When she called, her voice trembled, not with entitlement, but exhaustion. She didn't ask for money. She asked for time, for advice. I told Liam about it while I chopped vegetables for dinner. I'm thinking of helping her with a few months of mortgage payments, yeah, I said, just until she finds something new. He didn't even look up. That sounds stressful for her, he said, voice detached. His thumb kept flicking through wedding photos. It is, I said, forcing a smile. She's terrified. I think we can help. That's when he finally looked at me, annoyed, like I'd interrupted something important. Help how? I could cover her mortgage for a while. It's not a big deal, just until she's back on her feet. He exhaled sharply through his nose. Why is that our problem, Jacintha? She's a grown woman with a husband and kids. She'll figure it out. It's not my responsibility. He said it so casually, like a weather report. I froze, knife halfway through a bell pepper. She's my sister, Liam. Exactly. Your sister, not our financial project. He pushed his tablet aside and leaned back, that practiced confidence in every gesture. You've got to stop trying to fix everyone. It's not healthy. I remember staring at him, trying to find something, any trace of empathy behind those hazel eyes. There was none. I'm not fixing her, I said softly. I'm helping my family. And I'm saying you shouldn't, he countered. We have a wedding to plan, a honeymoon to save for, and a future to build. You can't keep draining your energy on people who can't manage their own lives. It wasn't just what he said. It was how easily he said it. Like compassion was a currency he refused to spend. I nodded slowly. You're right, I murmured. It's not your responsibility. He smiled, pleased that I'd seen reason. Then he went back to scrolling through his phone, humming along to the music. He didn't notice how quiet the room had become. But in that silence, something inside me shifted. There are moments that reveal the entire architecture of a relationship. One small beam gives way, and suddenly you see how fragile everything really was. That sentence, "It's not my responsibility," was Liam's tracer line. It illuminated the whole battlefield. My family wasn't a shared bond to him. They were a liability. His parents, with their bankrupt ventures and empty posturing, were noble victims of bad luck. My sister, a working mother facing a crisis, was an inconvenience. And I realized, with a kind of cold, mathematical certainty, that the man I loved failed the most important test of his life. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. Instead, I watched him, his calm, careless movements, the way he smiled at his reflection in the screen as if his world was perfectly intact. In his mind, he'd won the argument. In mine, he'd just ended our engagement. I cleaned up the cutting board, rinsed the knife, and set his plate in front of him like nothing had changed. He thanked me absently, his focus already back on some photo of a resort in Bali. He didn't see the look in my eyes. He never looked long enough to notice the quiet things. As the rain tapped against the window, I thought about Diane, how she'd called me, voice shaking, afraid of losing her home, and I thought about the man sitting across from me, who'd just declared her suffering irrelevant. That was the moment I stopped being in love. I didn't break off the engagement that night. I just made a silent promise to myself. The next time Liam Carter said, "It's not my responsibility," I'd make sure he understood exactly what those words cost. For now, I smiled. I nodded. I let him think everything was fine, because when you've spent years learning how to read markets, you know one simple rule: never act on emotion, wait for the pattern. And when it appears, strike with precision. That was the night my love became strategy, and the countdown began. In the weeks that followed, I became a ghost in my own engagement. To Liam, nothing had changed. We still toured wedding venues, argued about invitation fonts, pretended our life together was taking shape. He kissed my forehead in public, called me my steady anchor, and told our friends that I kept everything running smoothly. And I did, just not in the way he thought. Because while he was rehearsing a future, I was rehearsing an exit. It started with Diane. I met her for lunch the next afternoon at a quiet cafe near her son's school. She looked tired in a way that makeup can't hide, the kind of fatigue that seeps into the bones. I didn't want to ask you for help, she said, pushing the menu aside. I just didn't know what else to do. You didn't ask, I said gently. I'm offering. She tried to protest, but I slid a folded envelope across the table. 6 months of mortgage payments. You'll pay me back when you can, or not at all. Doesn't matter. Her eyes welled up. Liam's okay with this? I smiled tightly. Liam doesn't need to be. That night, I made dinner as usual. Liam scrolled through his phone at the counter, oblivious. Diane called me today, I said casually. She and Michael are hanging in there. He's applying for new jobs. That's good, he said, not looking up. See? People figure things out when they have to. I nodded. They do. He kissed my cheek absently, grabbed his keys, and said he was meeting a client for drinks. I watched him leave, the door closing behind him with a soft finality. When the car engine faded down the street, I pulled out my laptop. If there's one thing investment work teaches you, it's that numbers don't lie. But people do. At first, it was curiosity. Then it became obsession. Our joint savings account had small, steady withdrawals, $300 here, $400 there, marked as temporary transfers. Liam had always handled day-to-day expenses, and I trusted him. But these weren't for utilities or groceries. They were personal account transfers to his account. At first, I assumed he was moving money to cover something small, maybe a gift. But the timing was too consistent. The same day each month, usually right after a flurry of late-night calls from his parents. I pulled up his credit card statements next. That's when the pattern emerged. There were payments to something called Prestige Event Solutions, a vendor I didn't recognize. A quick search told me it was the parent company of the Crescent Hill Country Club, the very one Richard and Eleanor Carter bragged about belonging to, despite their temporary cash flow setbacks. He wasn't just paying for their dues, he was disguising the charges under a corporate name. My pulse stayed calm, my breathing even. It was a professional reaction, like discovering fraud in an audit. But beneath that, something broke. Not with a scream, but with a snap you only hear on the inside. For the next 2 weeks, I played my part flawlessly. I let him think we were happy. I let him believe I was naive. I laughed when he called me the most stable woman he knew. At night, while he slept, I opened my laptop and made quiet calculations. The total amount he'd siphoned, the overlap between his transfers and his parents' business emergencies. I built a folder labeled House Docs on my desktop. Inside it, bank records, call logs, digital copies of every document I could find. I backed it up to the cloud and an encrypted drive, both under a different alias. I was no longer the woman he loved. I was the auditor he didn't know he'd hired. Then one night, as I sat reviewing a set of old investment filings from one of Richard Carter's ventures, I found a familiar signature, Liam's. He'd co-signed on one of his father's defunct companies 2 years ago, back when we'd first moved in together. The company had folded 6 months later, leaving investors empty-handed and one lawsuit pending that never made it to trial. I realized then that Liam wasn't just complicit. He was an active participant in his father's string of financial resurrections. He didn't believe in responsibility because he'd never had to bear it. One night, after he'd gone to bed, I sat on the couch staring at our engagement photo, the one he insisted on framing for the mantel. We looked perfect. He was smiling, confident, his arm around me. I was gazing up at him with soft trust that already felt foreign. I traced the edge of the photo frame and whispered to myself, "You're already gone, aren't you?" Because the truth was, he had been gone for a while, lost in a world where appearances mattered more than integrity, where family was leverage, not love. A week later, Diane called again. She'd landed 3 interviews and was feeling hopeful. "You always know how to make things work," she said, laughing. I smiled at the irony. You'd be surprised. Then, before we hung up, she added something that stayed with me. "You're the calmest person I know, Jace. But sometimes calm looks a lot like someone who's already made up her mind." She was right, I had. I walked into the kitchen that night and found Liam pouring himself a drink. His phone lit up with a text. "Dad, call me tonight. Urgent." He sighed and said, "I swear, my parents always expect me to fix everything." "Do you?" I asked. He laughed. "Of course, that's what family does." And there it was. The hypocrisy so clear, it almost made me dizzy. He didn't notice the faint smile that tugged at my lips as I replied, "You're right, Liam. That is what family does." He kissed me goodnight, not realizing I'd just marked the day on my calendar. The countdown had started ticking louder now, not to a wedding, but to a reckoning. Because some wars aren't declared with words. They begin in silence, and they end when the right moment arrives. In the months before the wedding, the Carters became a full-time performance. Every dinner, every phone call, every visit from his parents had a script. Richard Carter would talk about his next big venture. Eleanor would beam and nod like a studio audience, and Liam would echo their confidence word for word. I used to find it charming, the way he believed in them, the way he wanted to protect their illusions. But once I knew the truth, the whole act felt like bad theater. The roles were simple. Richard was the visionary, Eleanor was the curator of appearances, and Liam was the bridge, the dutiful son who connected their fiction to my reality. And me, I was the funding. Richard Carter's record wasn't hard to trace. You don't need insider contacts when the wreckage is public. There were at least 4 dissolved LLCs in his name, each with a different revolutionary idea. An app that never launched, an import-export business that never exported, a sustainable design firm that owed 3 months' rent when it folded. Every venture ended the same way: investor money gone, debts unpaid, and Richard moving on to the next pitch. Eleanor, meanwhile, maintained the illusion. She posted carefully filtered photos of brunches and charity galas, wrote captions about gratitude and perseverance, and wore borrowed jewelry like it was armor. And Liam, he truly thought they were victims of bad luck. When I discovered the co-signature on one of his father's defunct companies, something inside me settled. It wasn't outrage anymore. It was calculation. He wasn't innocent. He was practiced. I began tracking him the way I'd track a volatile market. Phone logs, spending patterns, tone shifts. He'd call his father after client dinners and stay on the phone for 45 minutes, his voice a mix of irritation and obligation. Then, without fail, a new transfer would appear in our joint account history the next morning. Another few $100s gone. He thought of it as filial duty. I thought of it as embezzlement by affection. The day everything crystallized, we were at his parents' house for brunch. Eleanor had prepared a spread fit for a magazine. Silver platters, imported pastries, champagne before noon. "So, darling," she said, refilling my glass without asking, "have you two decided on the guest list? I think Richard's business partners should be invited. Networking never hurts." Liam squeezed my hand under the table, his silent cue to smile. "We're keeping it small," I said. "Family, close friends, no investors." Richard laughed too loudly. But marriage is an investment, Jacintha, and with your background in finance, I'm sure you understand returns." Eleanor giggled like it was the cleverest thing she'd ever heard. I smiled thinly. Some investments only look profitable until you read the fine print. They didn't catch it, but Liam did. His thumb stiffened against my palm. That was the moment I knew he suspected something, but not enough. Later that evening, while he showered, I opened his email on our shared tablet. He'd left the inbox logged in. There it was, an email from his father with the subject line, "Urgent, Bridge Loan Proposal." Attached was a glossy PDF filled with buzzwords: vertical integration, global reach, family-led innovation. The last line of the email read, "Liam, this is a great opportunity for you and Jacintha to be part of something huge." My reflection in the screen looked calm, almost serene. They were planning to make me their investor. Not just their daughter-in-law, their bailout plan. That night, I lay in bed beside Liam, staring at the ceiling. He was asleep, breathing evenly, unaware that every exhale marked another layer of his own deceit peeling away. The longer I watched him, the less I saw the man I loved. I saw a pattern, a transaction disguised as affection. My mother used to say that love is like a ledger. The right person adds balance to your life. The wrong one drains it line by line. I was done letting mine bleed red. In the morning, I woke before dawn. I brewed coffee, set the cup by his side, and left a note saying I had an early client meeting. Then I drove straight to a notary office. By noon, my lawyer had removed Liam as a joint holder from every account under my name. My direct deposits were rerouted to a new bank. My financial ties to him were now, on paper, non-existent. That evening, he came home with flowers, a peace offering for the tension he couldn't name. "You've been distant lately," he said, brushing my hair off my shoulder. "Cold, even." I smiled. Just tired. He kissed me, misreading the calm for forgiveness. He didn't realize calm can also be closure. The following weekend, Diane called again. She'd landed a new job, a better one, and wanted to pay me back. I told her no. Consider it a family investment, I said. Liam must be proud of you, she teased. I let out a soft laugh. Oh, he's proud of something, just not what he thinks. I spent the rest of that evening building my case file, my insurance portfolio, as I called it. Bank statements, proof of misused funds, corporate filings, emails. By the time I closed my laptop, the folder on my desktop had grown into something formidable, a silent fortress built from truth. And when I looked at it, I didn't feel fear. I felt peace. Because in the world I come from, numbers don't lie. They just wait for the right moment to speak. And soon, mine would speak louder than Liam Carter ever imagined. There's a certain calm that settles in when you know exactly how a story will end. By the time Liam came to me that Thursday night, desperation disguised as charm, I already knew what he was going to say. Jace, he began, setting his phone face down on the counter, a rare gesture meant to show I had his full attention. My dad's business is in a tough spot, just temporary. There it was, the opening move. He took my silence as invitation and continued. He's been working on this import deal for months. They're so close to landing a major contract, but the supplier's demanding proof of liquidity. It's just about timing, really. He needs $50,000 to bridge it. Once the deal closes, he'll pay it back in full, with interest. I set down my glass and looked at him. He was rehearsed, confident, persuasive, the same tone he used when he pitched investors at networking events. And you believe him, I said. Of course I do, he said quickly. You've seen how hard he's been trying. He's finally turning a corner. I leaned back against the counter. And you want me to give him $50,000? He hesitated. Us, Jace. You and me. It's family. Yours, I said quietly. He blinked. What? I softened my tone, the way you do when you're guiding someone toward a truth they don't want to see. Liam, your family, not mine. He laughed lightly, brushing it off. You make it sound like a charity case. It's an investment opportunity. My dad even offered to show us the pitch deck. I watched him, fascinated. The way his confidence wavered, each time I didn't immediately agree. The way he tried to read me and kept coming up blank. Finally, I nodded. Fine, let's hear it. Invite them to dinner this weekend. His whole face lit up. Really, you'll listen? Of course, I said. If it's a good opportunity, I'll consider it. He grinned, relief spilling through his body like caffeine. You won't regret this. Once Dad explains everything, you'll see it's solid. Oh, I'm sure I will, I said, turning away so he wouldn't see the smile pulling at my lips. That Saturday, I woke early. The house was spotless, dinner prepped. But it wasn't the food I was preparing, it was the scene. On the dining table, beneath the linen runner, sat a slim leather portfolio. Matte black, unassuming. Inside it, 6 months of quiet investigation. Bank transfers from our shared account. Credit card payments to Prestige Event Solutions. Public filings of Richard Carter's business bankruptcies. A neat, devastating chronology of deceit. Next to the folder, I placed my phone, already recording. Not for revenge, for clarity. Because people like the Carters are masters of rewriting reality, and I wanted proof of what was said when their masks came off. At 6:50 sharp, the doorbell rang. Liam looked immaculate, blazer pressed, hair styled with that effortless precision that took 20 minutes and 2 products. They're going to love you for this, he whispered, kissing my cheek. I'm sure they will. Richard and Eleanor Carter arrived looking like they were stepping into a magazine spread. Him in a tailored navy suit, her in pearls and perfume thick enough to declare her arrival. Richard carried a bottle of champagne. Eleanor carried expectation. Darling, she exclaimed, air-kissing my cheek. You look radiant. This must be the stress before the wedding. Oh, I remember those days. I smiled politely. Please, come in. They took their seats and the performance began. Richard dominated this conversation, of course. He launched into a monologue about market volatility, global logistics, and unprecedented opportunities. His voice filled the room like smoke, dense and suffocating. Liam nodded along, his hand occasionally finding mine, a silent signal to play the supportive fiancé. When dinner was served, the pitch began. Richard leaned forward, elbows on the table, and slid a glossy folder across to me. Our company, Carter Global Imports, is on the verge of something monumental, he said. We've secured a potential contract that will triple our revenue in 6 months, but we need liquidity to finalize the deal. How much liquidity? I asked, though I already knew. 50,000, he said without hesitation. Bridge funding. Once the contract's signed, the return will be immediate. He smiled, the kind of smile meant to close deals. Eleanor placed her hand over his, her diamonds flashing under the chandelier. It's family, after all, she said softly, and family helps each other. I let the words hang in the air. Family helps each other. Liam reached for my hand. What do you think, Jace? It's a great opportunity, right? I tilted my head, studying him the way I might study a chart before the crash. I'll need to review the documents, I said, and your father's financial history. Richard blinked. Excuse me? I smiled. You're asking for $50,000. That's a formal investment. Any prudent investor would perform due diligence, don't you agree? The confidence in his face wavered for the first time. Of course, he said quickly, but it's all in motion. No need for paperwork to complicate family trust. Oh, I said softly. I think trust deserves paperwork. Dinner continued, but the mood had shifted. Liam kept glancing at me, trying to decode the calm in my voice. He didn't realize he wasn't decoding me. He was walking right into the ending I'd already written. When dessert was served, Eleanor tried to recover the mood. I'm sure you two have enough to think about with the wedding coming up, she said lightly. Money stress can be such a strain on young couples. I set my fork down, folded my napkin neatly, and looked at all three of them. Oh, don't worry, I said. By the end of tonight, none of us will have to think about this wedding again. Liam frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing yet, I said, smiling faintly. Let's finish dessert first. Inside, I felt a stillness I hadn't felt in months. The kind that comes when every number aligns, every variable accounted for. It wasn't anger that filled me now, it was precision. Because love may have blinded me once, but strategy never would again. Next came the reveal, and the moment when Liam Carter would finally understand the true cost of the words he'd thrown so easily into the air. It's not my responsibility. The air in the dining room was the kind of still that follows a lightning strike. No sound, no motion, just pressure. Liam was still smiling faintly, expecting me to pour champagne and toast his father's great opportunity. Eleanor was smoothing her napkin in her lap, her rings clinking like nervous punctuation marks. Richard leaned back, certain he'd already won. I reached for the matte black portfolio beside my chair. Before we talk about investments, Yi, I said, there's something you should see. I opened it and slid the first page across the table, a joint account statement with 6 withdrawals highlighted in yellow. Richard squinted. What's this? Those, I said, are the funds Liam transferred from our shared account into his personal one. Each transaction corresponds with a phone call or text from you. Liam straightened, confusion giving way to alarm. Jace, what are you doing? I'm explaining my due diligence, I said calmly. You taught me to be thorough, remember? I slid the second document forward. His credit card summary. The line item for Prestige Event Solutions circled in red ink. That, by the way, is the Crescent Hill Country Club, your parents' membership dues, paid from my card. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. There must be a mistake. No mistake, I said evenly. 6 months' worth of payments disguised as business expenses. Liam's color drained. I was going to tell you. When? I asked. Before or after you asked me for 50,000 more? He opened his mouth, closed it again. Richard's expression hardened. Now, listen here, young lady. Actually, I said, cutting him off, you listen. I slid out the next stack. Public records, business filings, bankruptcy notices, every failed venture bearing his name. You've been starting and collapsing companies for over a decade. You live on investor money you never repay. You call it entrepreneurship. The courts call it mismanagement. Richard's jaw twitched. This is outrageous. What's outrageous, I said quietly, is how easily your son helped you do it. Liam pushed his chair back, voice low, shaking. You went through my accounts? I went through our accounts, I said. You were the one laundering compassion into excuses. For a moment, nobody breathed. Then I looked straight at Richard and repeated his son's words, each syllable cold and deliberate. Tell him to figure it out. It's not my responsibility. The echo hit like a slap. Liam stared at me, understanding dawning too late. Eleanor's eyes glistened, not from shame, but from panic. Richard barked out a short, humorless laugh. So that's it? Some vendetta because you think we used you? I don't think, I said, standing. I verified. I gathered the papers, stacked them neatly, slid them back into the folder. This dinner was your pitch. Consider this my answer. No. Liam's voice cracked. Jace, please, don't do this in front of them. In front of them is exactly where it belongs, I said, because when my sister lost her job, you told me her crisis wasn't your problem. You mocked the idea of family responsibility. Yet here we are, your own father begging for a bailout, and you expect me to play savior. He reached for me, and I stepped back. You helped her, didn't you? He said hoarsely. Yes, I said, because that's what family does. We help when someone's drowning. We don't drain others to stay afloat. The room seemed to tilt. Eleanor whispered something about misunderstanding. Richard muttered about lawyers. I turned toward the hallway, calm as ever. The engagement is over, I said over my shoulder. The wedding's canceled. You have 1 week to collect your things. Liam stood, eyes wide. You can't just... I can, I said, and I already have. He looked at me then, not as his fiancé, but as the stranger who'd outplayed him. The silence between us was final. When I reached the doorway, I paused. You once said helping people wasn't your responsibility, I said softly. I just returned the favor. Then I left the room, my heels clicking against the tile like a clock counting down the last seconds of a life that wasn't mine anymore. Behind me came Eleanor's whisper, brittle and small. Richard, what do we do now? His answer was faint, stripped of bluster. We figure it out. That night, I sat in the dark living room, the house finally quiet. Outside, rain fell again, the same slow rhythm as that night in the kitchen when everything started. Only this time, it wasn't grief I felt. It was relief, because justice doesn't always need rage. Sometimes it just needs precision. The week after that dinner unfolded like a slow implosion. Not loud, not cinematic, just silent cracks running through the beautiful facade that used to be our life. Liam didn't leave right away. He alternated between pleading and pretending, begging me to reconsider one day, acting like nothing had happened the next. I ignored both performances. On the 4th day, he came home to find the locks changed and an envelope taped to the door. Inside was a letter from my lawyer and a cashier's check for the last of the shared utilities. No accusations, no explanations. Just a clean balance sheet, our final transaction. By the following week, the Carters' world began to cave in. Richard's bridge deal never materialized. Without new funding, his company missed payments to suppliers. Then the creditors came knocking. Within a month, the office lease was terminated. The website vanished. The phone stopped working. Eleanor tried to keep up appearances online, but even filters can't mask foreclosure notices. Their house went up for auction, and they moved into a rented townhouse far from their old neighborhood. Liam's job at the boutique consulting firm, the one he'd used to fund his image, quietly let him go after whispers spread about his father's financial scandals. Apparently, a partner's fiancé exposing fraud at a family dinner isn't great for optics. The irony wasn't lost on me. He had called compassion irresponsible, but it was his lack of it that ruined him. Diane, on the other hand, was thriving. She'd landed a managerial position at a logistics company. Michael had a steady contract, and the boys were back in their old school. When she called to tell me they'd paid off one of their debts, she added softly, You saved us, Jace. I don't think I ever thanked you properly. You don't have to, I said. You did it yourself. I just gave you time. It struck me how simple the truth was. Love isn't rescue, it's breathing room. And when someone refuses to offer even that, they show you exactly what you mean to them. 3 months later, I ran into Eleanor at a grocery store. She looked thinner, her pearls replaced by a plain silver chain. When she saw me, she hesitated, then forced a brittle smile. Jacintha, she said, voice tight, you look well. I am, I said. She fidgeted with her cart. You know, Liam, he's been struggling. He's not himself lately. I'm sure he'll figure it out, I said gently. She flinched like I'd slapped her. For a second, I saw the flash of recognition. She remembered those words, the same ones her son had thrown like stones months before, the same ones I'd handed back to him when everything fell apart. I didn't gloat. I didn't have to. Sometimes the quietest echo is the loudest. 6 months later, I saw Liam again. It was at a restaurant downtown. I was there with Diane and her husband, celebrating her promotion. As we stood to leave, I spotted him across the room, sitting at a table with a woman who looked eerily like his mother, polished, fragile, and hungry for status. He saw me too. Our eyes met for a moment. Not anger, not hatred, just realization. He saw Diane laughing beside me, Michael paying the bill, the life I had protected and rebuilt. He saw what family actually looked like, and he saw what he'd thrown away when he chose pride over empathy. He looked down. I turned and walked past him without a word. Later that night, as rain began again, that same slow, soft rhythm that had bookended everything, I sat by my window with a cup of tea and thought about how simple justice can be when you stop trying to make it poetic. It doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it's just a quiet shift, a life set right, a heart lighter than before. Love taught me about balance sheets. Loss taught me about boundaries. And betrayal taught me the clean beauty of letting people face the math they created. When someone tells you something isn't their responsibility, believe them. Because one day you'll return the favor, and you'll do it without anger, without noise, just calm, perfect clarity.